They said she vanished into thin air. They whispered that she was broken, bought off, or simply too weak for the dynasty she married into. Sterling Hawthorne, the titan of New York industry, erased her from his life with the stroke of a pen and replaced her with a younger, sharper model before the ink was even dry. But they forgot one crucial rule of high society. The quietest exits often precede the loudest entrances. Tonight, the forgotten wife returns. She isn't just wearing a revenge dress, she's wearing a crown. And she didn't come alone. This is the story of Serafina's stunning comeback and the secret heir that will bring an empire to its knees. The penthouse at 432 Park Avenue felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum of glass and steel. Outside, the New York City skyline shimmered indifferent to the devastation unfolding on the 89th floor. Serafina stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her reflection ghosting against the city lights. She looked pale, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that Sterling preferred. She was 23, naive, and hopelessly in love with a man who looked at her the way one looks at a fluctuating stock graph, calculating cold and ready to sell. "It's a simple arrangement, Sarah," Sterling said. He didn't even look up from his tablet. He was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, swirling a glass of scotch that cost more than her father's annual salary. "Irreconcilable differences. The PR team has already drafted the statement. You'll be treated fairly." "Fairly." Serafina's voice trembled. She turned to face him. He was devastatingly handsome, with that sharp jawline and icy blue eyes that had once made her feel like the only woman in the world. Now they just looked empty. "Sterling, I'm your wife. We've been married for 2 years. You're discarding me because..." Why, because I didn't charm the senator's wife at the gala. Because I wore the wrong shade of blue. Sterling finally looked up, his expression one of bored pity. "Because you don't fit, Sarah. You never did. My mother said it, the board said it, and frankly, Isabel says it." The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Isabel. Isabel Dupree. The heiress to the Dupree shipping fortune. Tall, blonde, viciously sharp, and everything Serafina wasn't. She was old money predator to Serafina's no-money prey. "Isabel is moving in next week," Sterling added, delivering the blow with casual cruelty. "It's better for the merger if I'm seen with someone of her caliber." Serafina felt bile rise in her throat. She instinctively placed a hand over her stomach. He didn't know. She had planned to tell him tonight over dinner, before the lawyers arrived, before the papers were shoved across the Marble Island. She was 8 weeks pregnant. "Sterling," she whispered, stepping closer, "there is something you need to know. Something that might change things." The elevator doors chimed, a soft melodic ding that signaled the end of her life as she knew it. Isabel walked in. She didn't knock. She owned the space already. She was draped in a white cashmere coat, looking every bit the queen arriving to evict the peasant. "Oh, good, you're still packing," Isabel said, her voice like silk wrapped around a razor blade. She walked past Serafina, as if she were a piece of furniture, heading straight for Sterling. She kissed him on the cheek, leaving a smear of red lipstick that looked like a blood stain. "The lawyers are downstairs, darling. We need her out before the paparazzi catch wind of the settlement." Sterling stood up, adjusting his cufflinks. Sarah was just leaving. Serafina looked between them. The man she worshipped, and the woman who had whispered poison in his ear for months. If she told him about the baby, now, what would happen? Would he love the child? Or would he take the baby? Raise him with Isabel and cast Serafina out anyway. The Hawthorns had lawyers who could prove the sky was green. They would paint her as unstable, unfit. A gold digger trapping him with a child. She would lose the baby to this cold glass prison. A sudden fierce protectiveness surged through her veins. It was the first spark of the fire that would eventually burn them all down. She dropped her hand from her stomach. She straightened her spine. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't slouch to make herself look smaller next to him. "You're right, Sterling," Serafina said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't fit." She walked to the table and picked up the pen. She didn't read the terms. She didn't care about the alimony, the hush money, or the non-disclosure agreements. She just wanted out. She signed her name with a flourish, Serafina Hawthorne, for the last time. Smart girl. Isabel smirked, pouring herself a drink from Sterling's glass. Serafina grabbed her small overnight bag. She had packed it hours ago, sensing the storm. She walked to the elevator, pausing only when the doors opened. She looked back at them, a tableau of wealth and corruption. One day, Serafina said, her eyes locking onto Sterling's, "You're going to realize that you sold a diamond to buy a piece of glass." Sterling laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Goodbye, Sarah." The doors closed. As the elevator descended 89 floors, Serafina slid down the wall and wept. But by the time she reached the lobby, she had wiped her face. She walked out into the cold October rain of Manhattan, hailed a yellow cab, and disappeared. Sterling Hawthorne thought he had solved a problem. He had no idea he had just created his greatest adversary. 5 years later. The world had moved on. The tabloids had forgotten Serafina within a month. Sterling Hawthorne's merger with the Dupree family had created a conglomerate worth billions. He was the king of New York, and Isabel was his unofficial queen. They weren't married yet. Isabel liked the chase, and Sterling liked keeping his options open, but they were the power couple every magazine featured. But the Hawthorne empire was bleeding. It was a slow bleed, unnoticed by the public, but terrifying to the board. A mysterious competitor had emerged in the European markets, a private equity firm known only as Aurelia Holdings. No one knew who ran it. The CEO was a proxy, a figurehead. The real power was a silent partner, a ghost investor who seemed to predict market crashes before they happened. Aurelia Holdings had been quietly buying up Hawthorne's debts, acquiring the tech startups Sterling wanted before he could get to them, and stealing his best engineers. In a sun-drenched villa on the coast of Amalfi, Italy, the ghost investor sat on a terrace overlooking the Tyrrhenian Sea. Serafina Auclair. She had taken her mother's maiden name, sipped an espresso. She was no longer the pale, frightened girl in the grey cardigan. At 28, she was striking. Her hair was cut into a chic, sharp bob. Her skin was bronzed by the Italian sun. She wore a white linen suit that cost more than the settlement Sterling had thrown at her. "Maman!" A squeal of laughter broke the silence. A little boy with a mop of unruly dark curls and piercing blue eyes. Sterling's eyes ran across the terrace, chasing a golden retriever. "Leo, careful near the edge," Serafina called out, her voice warm but authoritative. Leo, 5 years old. He was brilliant, kind, and the spitting image of his father, minus the cruelty. He was the center of her universe. And he was the secret she had guarded with her life. Her assistant, a sharp-witted Frenchman named Dominic, stepped onto the terrace, holding a tablet and a thick, cream-colored envelope. "The reports from New York are in Patron," Dominic said. Hawthorne Global's stock dipped another 4%. Isabelle Dupree is throwing a tantrum in the press about corporate sabotage. Serafina smiled, a cold, satisfied curve of her lips. It's not sabotage, Dominic. It's correction. What is that in your hand? Dominic held up the envelope. It was embossed with gold leaf. It arrived via courier this morning. It seems you've finally been summoned. Serafina took the envelope. She recognized the seal immediately. The Metropolitan Charity Gala, the most exclusive event of the New York social calendar. The theme this year, Gilded Resurrection. It's addressed to the CEO of Aurelia Holdings, Dominic noted. They still don't know it's you. They want the money, Serafina. Sterling is desperate for a partnership to stabilize the stock. He's inviting the competition into the lion's den to try and broker a deal. Serafina ran her thumb over the heavy paper. She had spent 5 years building Aurelia Holdings from the ground up, using her settlement money and a genius for algorithmic trading that Sterling had never bothered to notice she possessed. She had studied, invested, and clawed her way to the top of the European financial world, all while raising Leo in privacy. She had waited for the perfect moment. She didn't just want to hurt Sterling. She wanted to dismantle him. She wanted him to see what he had thrown away. Isabelle will be there, Serafina mused, wearing the family diamonds. Sterling will be there, Dominic added, looking for a savior. Serafina looked at Leo, who was now showing the dog a seashell. She thought of the night she was kicked out into the rain. She thought of the lonely nights in a small Paris apartment, terrified she wouldn't be able to afford diapers. She thought of the fire that had kept her warm when love had frozen over. Dominic, she said, standing up. Call the pilot. Prepare the jet. We are going to New York. Yes, Serafina said, turning to look at the sea one last time. And tell the designers I need a dress. Something red. Something that looks like blood and victory. And Leo? Dominic asked gently. Serafina looked at her son. For years she had hidden him to protect him. But now Sterling was weak. Now she held the cards. Leo wasn't a liability anymore. He was the ace. Leo comes with us, she said. It's time his father met him. That will cause a scandal, Serafina, bringing a secret child to the gala. It will be war. Serafina turned back, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. I'm counting on it. The Gulfstream G650 touched down at Teterboro Airport, just as the sun began its descent behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the city in bruised hues of purple and gold. It was a stark contrast to Serafina's departure 5 years ago. Then she had left via a cramped economy seat on a commercial flight, sobbing quietly into a paper napkin. Today she descended the air stairs, wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat that cost more than her father's house, flanked by a security detail that looked ready to invade a small country. Dominic was already on the tarmac, waiting by the fleet of black SUVs. He held a tablet in one hand and a secure phone in the other. Welcome back to the jungle, Patron, Dominic said, opening the door of the lead SUV. The city is buzzing. The rumors about the mystery buyer of the Hawthorne debt are trending on Twitter. They think it's a Russian oligarch or perhaps Elon Musk. No one suspects the ex-wife. Serafina lifted Leo into the car. The boy's eyes were wide, glued to the window as the skyscrapers loomed closer. Maman, is this where the giants live? Something like that, my love, Serafina said, buckling him in. But don't worry, we're the giants now. They weren't staying at a hotel. Serafina had quietly purchased a penthouse at 111 West 57th Street, the Steinway Tower. It was thinner, taller, and more aggressive than Sterling's building. From her living room, She could look down on the roof of 432 Park Avenue. It was petty, perhaps, but Serafina had learned that in New York, real estate was warfare. As the convoy wove through traffic, Serafina's phone buzzed. It was a notification from the Wall Street Journal app. Hawthorne, global stocks plunge ahead of Gala, amidst hostile takeover rumors. She swiped it away. "Dominic," she said, her voice low. "Is everything ready for tonight? The dress has been steamed. The jewelry arrived from the vault an hour ago, and the press releases are drafted ready to go live the moment you give the signal." Dominic paused, looking at her with concern. "Are you sure about Leo? Once he steps onto that carpet, his anonymity is gone. The paparazzi will hunt him." Serafina looked at her son, who was happily playing a game on his tablet, oblivious to the fact that he was the heir to an industrial dynasty. "Sterling denied me a family," she said softly. "He told me I wasn't mother material for a Hawthorne. He needs to see what he lost, and Leo deserves his birthright. I won't hide him in the shadows while Isabel plays stepmother to my legacy." The car pulled up to the tower. The doorman seasoned New Yorkers who thought they had seen everything stiffened as Serafina stepped out. She radiated a cold, focused energy. Up in the penthouse, the atmosphere was frantic but controlled. A team of stylists, hair and makeup artists, the best in the world, flown in from Paris, were waiting. "Red," the lead stylist, a severe woman named Claudette, commanded. "We are doing the lip strictly matte red. No gloss. This isn't a party look. It is a declaration of war." Serafina sat in the chair, watching her reflection transform. The soft, approachable girl Sterling had married was gone. Her cheekbones were contoured to look like blades. Her eyes were smoked out with charcoal and gold. "Maman looks like a superhero," Leo chirped from the floor, where he was wrestling with his tiny tuxedo tie. Serafina turned, her heart swelling. She motioned him over. She fixed his tie, smoothing his dark curls that were identical to Sterling's. "Leo," she said, looking him in the eye. "Tonight there will be a lot of flashing lights. People will shout. It will be loud. But you hold my hand, okay? You never let go." "I know, Maman. Like the red carpet in Cannes. Bigger than Cannes, baby. Much bigger." She stood up and walked to the dress form in the center of the room. It was a custom creation by Versace, commissioned months ago under a fake name. It wasn't just a dress. It was structural engineering. It was a deep, blood-red velvet that shifted to black in the folds, strapless with a plunging neckline that defied gravity and a slit that went all the way up her thigh. But the true statement was the back, or lack thereof. It was completely backless, framing the new tattoo that ran down her spine, a golden phoenix rising from ash. She stepped into it. The zipper hissed shut. She added the final touch, a necklace of raw, uncut diamonds. Not the polished, perfect stones Isabel favored, but jagged, heavy stones that looked like broken glass. Dominic walked in, checking his watch. "The gala red carpet has started. Sterling and Isabel just arrived. She's wearing silver. Very safe. Very bridal." Serafina smirked. "Perfect. She's the ice, I'm the fire." She took a deep breath, the oxygen filling her lungs with icy resolve. "Let's go, Dominic. It's time to crash the party." The Metropolitan Museum of Art was under siege. A tent had been erected over the famous steps, creating a tunnel of light and noise. The air smelled of expensive perfume hairspray and desperate ambition. Hundreds of photographers lined the barricades, screaming names. Rihanna. Over here, Kim. To the left. At the top of the stairs, Sterling Hawthorne stood stiffly. He looked tired. The stress of the failing stock price was etched into the lines around his eyes, though his tuxedo was impeccable. Beside him, Isabelle Dupree was preening. She wore a shimmering silver gown that was beautiful but boring, safe, predictable, just like her advice to the board. "Smile, darling," Isabelle hissed through her teeth, waving at the cameras. "The stock is down 3 points since the market closed. We need to look confident." "I'm trying," Sterling muttered, "but I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. My phone has been blowing up about Aurelia Holdings. The CEO is supposedly here tonight." "Good," Isabelle said, turning her best angle to Vogue. "We'll find him, charm him, and buy him out. We always do." Suddenly a hush fell over the bottom of the stairs. It started as a ripple and turned into a wave of silence that moved up the red carpet. The photographers stopped shouting. The other celebrities froze. A single car had pulled up to the curb. It wasn't the usual black SUV. It was a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, painted a midnight black with the license plate, Aurelia. The door opened. First a pair of black stilettos hit the pavement. Sharp, lethal. Then Serafina emerged. The crowd gasped. The red dress caught the floodlights, looking like liquid ruby against the pale stone of the museum. She didn't look like the Serafina they remembered, the shy, mousy wife who tripped over her own feet. She looked like a goddess of vengeance. But the silence truly deepened when she reached back into the car and extended her hand. A small boy stepped out. Leo, in his miniature tuxedo, looked at the wall of cameras with curious, intelligent eyes. He didn't shrink away. He held his mother's hand and stood tall. "Who is that?" a photographer whispered loud enough to be heard. "Is that?" "The ex-wife. That's Serafina Hawthorne," another answered, shock coloring his voice. "And, oh my God, look at the kid." The resemblance was undeniable. Leo had the Hawthorne jaw, the Hawthorne nose, and as he looked up at his mother and smiled, he had Sterling's exact expression. "Flash!" someone screamed. The spell broke. The cameras went nuclear. It was a blinding storm of white light. Click, 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 click. Serafina didn't hurry. She walked up the stairs with a slow, predatory grace. She didn't smile for the cameras. She gave them a look of cool, unbothered superiority. At the top of the stairs, Sterling and Isabelle were frozen. They hadn't moved. They were blocking the entrance, staring down at the woman, ascending toward them. Sterling's face went white. He dropped his hand from Isabelle's waist. He felt like he had been punched in the gut. He was looking at a ghost, but a ghost that was more alive than anyone else in the city. And then he saw the boy. His breath hitched. The math hit him instantly. 5 years. The boy looked mental. The dark curls, the blue eyes. His eyes. "Sarah." Sterling whispered the name, slipping out before he could stop it. Isabelle's grip on her clutch tightened until her knuckles turned white. "What is she doing here, security? Why is she here?" Serafina reached the top of the stairs. She stopped 2 feet away from them. The cameras were zooming in, capturing every micro-expression. She looked at Sterling, her eyes sweeping over him with a mix of familiarity and disdain. "Hello, Sterling," she said. Her voice was lower, smokier than he remembered. "Sarah," Sterling stammered, ignoring the press shouting his name. You look expensive," Serafina finished for him. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "I certainly hope so." Isabelle stepped forward, trying to physically block Sterling from Serafina's view. "This is a private event, Serafina. Only ticket holders and major donors. I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list. Did you sneak in to ask for more alimony?" Serafina laughed. It was a genuine laugh, bright and terrifying. "Oh, Isabel," Serafina said, looking down at the blonde woman as if she were a yapping chihuahua. "I didn't buy a ticket." Serafina leaned in close so the cameras couldn't hear, but Sterling and Isabel could hear every syllable. "I bought the debt that paid for this party," Serafina whispered. "I'm not a guest, Isabel. I'm your host." She squeezed Leo's hand. "Come, Leo. Let's go inside. It's getting crowded out here with all this trash." She swept past them, the train of her red dress brushing against Sterling's shoes. Sterling stood paralyzed. He watched the little boy walk past him. For a split second, Leo looked up. Father and son locked eyes for the first time. Leo offered a shy, polite nod, then followed his mother into the great hall. Sterling felt his world tilt on its axis. "Sterling," Isabel snapped, shaking his arm. "Did you hear what she said? Did you see that child? We need to call the lawyers. Now." "That was my son," Sterling whispered, his voice sounding hollow. "Isabel, I think that was my son." The interior of the Metropolitan Museum was transformed into a gilded fantasy. Tables were set around the Temple of Dendur, illuminated by floating candles. The crème de la crème of global society was sipping champagne and gossiping. But the gossip shifted the moment Serafina walked in. The room parted. It was instinctual. Power recognizes power. Serafina moved to the head table, Table 1, which was reserved for the highest tier sponsors. Traditionally, this was the Hawthorne table. She pulled out a chair for Leo. A frantic event coordinator, headset askew, rushed over. "Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am. This table is reserved for Mr. Hawthorne and the board of Aurelia Holdings." "I am Aurelia Holdings," Serafina said, not even looking at the man as she placed a napkin on Leo's lap. The coordinator froze. You are the ghost investor. I prefer silent partner, but tonight I'm feeling quite loud," she replied. "Mr. Hawthorne and Ms. Dupree can take the seats at the far end, or they can stand. I really don't care." Across the room, Sterling and Isabel entered. They looked shell-shocked. Sterling's eyes were glued to Table 1. He saw Serafina pouring water for the boy. The domesticity of the scene amidst the high glamour setting struck him with the force of a physical blow. Isabel was furiously typing on her phone. "I'm getting security to verify this. There is no way she owns Aurelia. She's a broke administrative assistant we fired 5 years ago." Sterling walked toward the table. He moved like a man in a trance. He ignored Isabel's protests. He ignored the board members who were trying to get his attention. He reached the table. Serafina didn't look up. She was cutting a piece of bread for Leo. "Serafina," Sterling said. His voice was rough. She finally raised her eyes. "Sit down, Sterling. You're making a scene." Sterling sat in the chair opposite her. Isabel arrived a second later, hovering over him like a vulture. "Who is he?" Sterling asked, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. "This is Leo," Serafina said calmly. "Leo, this is Mr. Hawthorne. He's an old acquaintance." Leo chewed his bread thoughtfully. "Hello. You look like me." The innocence of the statement silenced the table. Sterling's eyes filled with tears. He was a cold man, a ruthless businessman, but the biological imperative was screaming at him. "He's mine, isn't he?" "You were pregnant when you left." "I was pregnant when you threw me out," Serafina corrected, her voice sharpening. There is a difference. You hid him, Isabel interjected, finding her voice. That's kidnapping. That's fraud. We can sue you for custody immediately. You can't just hide an heir to the Hawthorne fortune. Serafina slowly turned her gaze to Isabel. Isabel, sit down before you embarrass yourself further, Serafina said. You aren't suing anyone, because as of 6:00 p.m. tonight, Aurelia Holdings executed the convertible bonds on Hawthorne Global's debt. Serafina reached into her clutch and pulled out a thin black business card. She slid it across the white tablecloth. I own 51% of your company, Sterling, she said. I own the building you live in. I own the patent for the new microchip you're trying to launch. And effectively, I own you. Sterling stared at the card. Aurelia Holdings, Serafina A. Hawthorne, CEO. You did this? Sterling asked, disbelief washing over him. How? While you were busy posing for magazines and buying yachts, I was studying, Serafina said. I used the settlement money, the money you gave me to go away, and I invested it against you. I bet on your arrogance, and sterling arrogance always pays out. This is insane, Isabel sputtered. You can't just take over a company like this. I already have. The board meets tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. I expect you both there to discuss your transition. Serafina took a sip of champagne. I'm thinking of restructuring. The role of Chief Strategy Officer, that's your job, isn't it? Isabel seems redundant. Isabel looked ready to scream, but people were watching. The governor was at the next table. The editor of the Times was watching them. She had to maintain composure, but her face was flushed a blotchy red. Sterling wasn't thinking about the company. He was still looking at Leo. I want to know him, Sterling said, his voice cracking. Sarah, please. The company. Fine. Take it. But he's my son. Serafina's expression softened, but only slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. It was pity. You had a wife who loved you, Sterling. You traded her for a merger. Now you want a son. You don't get to just have things because you want them anymore. You have to earn them. How? Sterling asked. Start by admitting the truth, Serafina said. What truth? Serafina leaned forward. That you didn't leave me because we were incompatible. You left me because Isabel told you to, because she promised you the Dupree shipping lanes if you married her. It was a business deal. Sterling looked down at his hands. Yes. Sterling, Isabel hissed. It's true. Sterling snapped at Isabel, his control finally snapping. I married you for the shipping lanes. And you know what? We lost the shipping lanes anyway because Aurelia bought the ports. Exactly, Serafina said, satisfied. I bought the ports 3 years ago, so you sold your happiness for nothing. Leo tugged on Serafina's sleeve. Maman, I'm bored. Can we dance? Serafina looked at her son. The anger in her eyes instantly replaced by adoration. In a minute, mon chéri. She looked back at Sterling. I am going to destroy everything you built, Sterling, not because I hate you, but because it's the only way to teach you that people aren't assets. You can't liquidate a family. I can change, Sterling pleaded. Let me prove it. Serafina stood up. The red dress cascaded around her like a pool of blood. The board meeting is at 8:00 a.m., she repeated. Don't be late. And Isabel. Isabel looked up, eyes full of venom. I'm moving back into the penthouse at 432 Park. Serafina lied. She didn't want it, but she wanted to see Isabel's face. I think the lighting there is better for Leo's playroom. You have 48 hours to vacate. Serafina took Leo's hand. Come on, Leo. Let's go find the dessert table. She walked away, leaving the King and Queen of New York, sitting in the ruins of their empire, while the orchestra began to play a waltz that sounded suspiciously like a victory march. But the night was far from over. As Serafina moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations from people who had shunned her 5 years ago, she felt a vibration in her clutch. It was a text from Dominic. Code red. We have a problem. The Dupree family isn't taking this lying down. Isabel's father just landed in New York, and he's not coming to talk business. He's brought his fixers. Security is compromised. Serafina stopped in the middle of the dance floor. She looked at the exit. She looked at Leo. The game of chess had just turned into a knife fight. The music in the great hall of the Metropolitan Museum seemed to warp the waltz, turning into a dirge. To the untrained eye, the party was still a spectacle of wealth and laughter. But to Serafina, the room had become a hunting ground. She tightened her grip on Leo's hand. The text from Dominic burned in her mind. Victor Dupree is here. Victor Dupree was not a businessman like Sterling. Sterling played by the rules of the market, ruthless, yes, but lawful. Victor was from an older, darker generation of wealth. He owned shipping lanes, ports, and politicians. If Isabel was a snake, her father was the Hydra. "Maman, you're hurting my hand," Leo whispered, looking up at her with concern. "I'm sorry, baby." Serafina loosened her grip, forcing a smile. "We're going to play a game. It's called Secret Exit. We need to leave without anyone seeing us." "Like spies?" Leo asked, his eyes lighting up. "Exactly like spies." Serafina signaled Dominic with a subtle nod. He was already moving through the crowd, cutting a path toward the service corridors near the Egyptian wing. But before they could reach the archway, a wall of black tuxedos blocked their path. 3 men stood there. They weren't security for the museum. They were too wide, too still. In the center stood an older man with silver hair, slicked back, leaning on a cane topped with an obsidian skull. Victor Dupree. "Serafina," Victor said. His voice was like gravel grinding on glass. "You've caused quite a mess tonight. My daughter is in the ladies' room in hysterics." "Victor," Serafina acknowledged, stepping in front of Leo. "If Isabel is hysterical, I suggest you buy her a sedative. I'm leaving." "I don't think so." Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You embarrassed the Dupree name. You threatened our merger, and you brought this bastard child to complicate the succession." He raised his cane, pointing it at Leo. "We need to have a private conversation. My car is waiting out back. You, the boy, and I are going for a ride to discuss the terms of your surrender." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Serafina said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And if you point that stick at my son again, I'll break it over your knee." One of Victor's bodyguards stepped forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. The threat was implicit but clear. They weren't going to let her walk out. Suddenly, a blur of motion crashed into the scene. Sterling Hawthorne shoved the bodyguard backward. It wasn't a gentleman's shove. It was a desperate, violent push. The bodyguard stumbled, crashing into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Glass shattered. The music stopped. The room went silent. Sterling stood between Serafina and the men, his chest heaving. He looked wild, stripped of his usual composure. "Get away from them," Sterling snarled at Victor. Victor looked at Sterling with disdain. "Step aside, boy. This woman is trying to steal your company. I'm handling it." "She's the mother of my son," Sterling shouted, his voice echoing off the stone temple walls. "And you are threatening them." I am protecting our investment, Victor barked. She's a fraud. She bought the debt with shell companies. We can crush her, Sterling. But we need to contain the boy. If the press finds out he's your heir, the stock volatility will destroy the merger. Sterling looked back at Leo. The boy was trembling, pressing his face into the velvet of Serafina's dress. For 5 years, Sterling had worshipped the god of stock volatility. He had made every decision to keep the line on the graph moving up. He had married a woman he didn't love and discarded the one he did, all for the sake of the empire. He looked at Serafina. She wasn't looking at him for help. She was looking for an exit. She was strong. She didn't need him. That realization broke him. The merger is dead, Victor, Sterling said, his voice deadly calm. And if you don't get out of my way, I will tell the press exactly why your shipping containers in Newark were seized by the FBI last month. Victor's face went pale. That was a secret that could send him to federal prison. You wouldn't dare, Victor hissed. It would tank your own stock. Watch me, Sterling challenged. I don't care about the stock anymore. I care about my son. The standoff lasted 3 agonizing seconds. Then Victor spat on the floor near Sterling's polished shoes. You're a fool, Hawthorne. You'll be bankrupt by morning. Victor signaled his men. They retreated, disappearing into the crowd like smoke. Serafina didn't wait to thank him. She grabbed Leo's hand. Dominic, now! They rushed through the service doors, past the confused catering staff, and out into the loading dock where Dominic had the car waiting. As she buckled Leo into the back seat, she felt a hand on her arm. It was Sterling. He had followed them. Sarah, he breathed, breathless. Are you okay? Serafina pulled her arm away. Her adrenaline was crashing, replaced by a cold fury. Don't play the hero now, Sterling. You let those vipers into our lives. You invited them in. I know, Sterling said, looking at Leo through the glass. I know I messed up. I didn't know about Leo. If I had known... You would have what? Serafina snapped. Taken him. Turned him into a prop for your campaigns. He is a child, Sterling, not an asset. She opened the car door. The board meeting is at 8:00 a.m., she repeated. If you really want to protect him, show up and sign the papers. Give me the company. It's the only way to get Victor off your back. She got in. The car sped off into the New York night, leaving Sterling standing alone in the alleyway, the smell of garbage and expensive cologne mixing in the air. The conference room on the top floor of Hawthorne Tower was designed to intimidate. The table was a 20-foot slab of black marble. The chairs were stiff. The view of Central Park was breathtaking, but no one ever looked at it. At 7:55 a.m. the room was full. The board of directors sat in nervous silence. They had seen the news. Mystery woman crashes gala. Secret Hawthorne heir revealed. Hawthorne stock suspended. Pending investigation. At the head of the table sat Sterling. He looked like he hadn't slept. He was wearing the same tuxedo shirt from the night before, unbuttoned at the collar sleeves rolled up. He looked disheveled and dangerous. To his right sat Isabel. She was perfectly put together in a white power suit, but her eyes were red-rimmed. Victor Dupre sat behind her, flanked by lawyers. "This is ridiculous," Isabel snapped. "She's 5 minutes late. Clearly last night was a bluff. She doesn't own 51%. It's impossible." "She's not bluffing," Sterling said quietly, staring at his coffee. "She's a secretary, Sterling. Isabel yelled, losing her composure. She fetched coffee. She doesn't know how to run a conglomerate. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, the double doors swung open. Serafina didn't walk in. She marched. She was wearing a navy blue suit, sharp and tailored. Her hair was pulled back. She carried no bag, only a single leather folder. Dominic walked a step behind her. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice projecting clearly. "And Isabel." She walked to the head of the table. Sterling stood up. For a moment, everyone thought he would fight her for the seat. Instead, Sterling pulled the chair out for her. "Madam CEO," Sterling murmured. A gasp went around the room. Sterling Hawthorne had just ceded the throne. Serafina sat down. She placed the folder on the table. "Let's cut to the chase," she began. "As you know, Aurelia Holdings has acquired a controlling interest in Hawthorne Global. I have the debt instruments here executed and notarized." "Objection!" One of Victor's lawyers stood up. "We are filing an injunction. We believe these funds were acquired through illicit insider trading. You used your previous proximity to Mr. Hawthorne to steal trade secrets." Serafina didn't even blink. She looked at Dominic. Dominic connected his tablet to the room's screen. "Actually," Serafina said, "I made my fortune shorting Dupree shipping." Charts appeared on the screen. Detailed, damning charts. "I knew 5 years ago that Victor was falsifying his cargo manifests to smuggle unlisted goods," Serafina explained coolly. "I knew that eventually the regulators would catch on, so I bet against him, heavily. When the scandal broke in Europe, a scandal I helped expose anonymously, his stock crashed. I made $2 billion in a week." She looked at Victor, who was turning a shade of purple. "I didn't steal from Sterling," she said. "I cannibalized you, Victor. I used your own corruption to buy the company you were trying to steal." The boardroom was silent. The directors looked from Victor to Serafina with awe. She hadn't just outsmarted them. She had outplayed a crime boss. "Now," Serafina continued, "Isabel." Isabel stood up, trembling with rage. "You can't do this. I'm the chief strategy officer. I have a contract." "Your contract has a morality clause," Serafina noted. "Subsection 4, paragraph B, conduct detrimental to the reputation of the company." Serafina slid a photo across the table. It was a picture taken by a paparazzi the previous night. It showed Victor's bodyguard threatening a 5-year-old child while Isabel stood by watching. "Allowing your father to threaten the heir to the company at a public charity gala." Serafina raised an eyebrow. "I'd say that's detrimental." "You're fired, Isabel. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." Isabel screamed. It was a primal, ugly sound. She grabbed a glass of water and threw it at Serafina. Sterling moved faster. He caught the glass with his hand. It didn't break, but water splashed over his shirt. He slammed the glass down. "Get out!" Sterling commanded, his voice shaking the walls. "Get out before I call the police!" Isabel looked at Sterling, the man she had tried to mold, control, and own. She saw nothing but hatred in his eyes. She turned and fled the room, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. Victor followed his lawyers, trailing behind like beaten dogs. The door closed. Serafina took a deep breath. She looked around the table at the stunned board members. "Now that the trash has been taken out," she said, smoothing her lapel, "let's talk about the Q4 projections. I have some ideas about the tech division." For the next 2 hours, Serafina dazzled them. She knew the numbers better than Sterling. She knew the weaknesses, the strengths, the hidden liabilities. By the time the meeting adjourned, the board wasn't just accepting her. They were terrified of her. and they respected her. When the room cleared, only Sterling and Serafina remained. Sterling sat at the side of the table watching her. He looked exhausted, broken, but strangely relieved. "You were amazing," he said softly. Serafina closed her folder. "I had to be. I had a lot to lose." "Sarah." Sterling stood up and walked toward her. He stopped a respectful distance away. "The company is yours. I'll resign. I'll go anywhere you want. But please, don't cut me out of Leo's life. I saw him last night, scared, and I felt something I haven't felt in years. I want to be his father." Serafina looked at him. She saw the lines of regret etched into his face. She saw the man she had loved buried under layers of ambition and mistakes. "You can't buy your way into his life, Sterling," she said. "He doesn't care about your money. He likes dinosaurs, grilled cheese sandwiches, and people who keep their promises." "I can learn about dinosaurs," Sterling said, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "I can learn to make grilled cheese." "It's going to take time," Serafina warned. "I don't trust you. Not yet. You broke me, Sterling. You made me build myself back up from nothing." "I know," he said, "and I will spend the rest of my life trying to fix it." Serafina studied him. She didn't offer forgiveness. Not yet. But she offered an opening. "He has a soccer game on Saturday," she said. "Central Park, Field 4, 10:00 a.m. Sterling's face lit up. It was the biggest deal he had ever closed. "I'll be there," he promised. "I'll be early." 3 months later. The transition of power at Hawthorne Global was not the smooth sailing the press releases suggested. It was a Cold War, fought in the corridors of the glass tower. Serafina didn't just take the CEO title. She moved her office into Sterling's old suite. She had the dark, brooding mahogany furniture removed and replaced with sleek, modern cream leather and gold accents. She literally brightened the room, removing the shadows where Sterling used to hide his secrets. Sterling, true to his word, had stayed. He accepted the demotion to President of Operations, a role that required him to report directly to Serafina. One rainy Tuesday morning, the tension finally snapped. They were in the middle of a strategy meeting regarding the Asian market expansion. Sterling was pacing his old arrogance, flaring up. "We need to cut the R&D budget for the solar project, Sarah," he argued, pointing at the projection screen. "It's bleeding cash. If we want the Q2 numbers to look good for the shareholders, we cut the fat." Serafina didn't look up from her tablet. "No." Sterling stopped pacing. "Excuse me, I said no." Serafina repeated finally, locking eyes with him. "The solar project is the future. We aren't running this company for the next quarter, Sterling. We are running it for the next 20 years. That's the difference between us. You see a balance sheet. I see a legacy. That budget stays." Sterling clenched his jaw. The old Sterling would have fired anyone who spoke to him like that. But the new Sterling, the one who had lost his wife, his son, and his dignity in a single night, took a deep breath. He looked at Serafina. She was immovable. She possessed a quiet strength he had never bothered to nurture when they were married. "You're right," Sterling said, exhaling slowly. "Long-term play. I got used to the quick wins. Old habits." Serafina noted her voice, softening just a fraction. "Breaking them is part of your probation." It wasn't just the boardroom where Sterling was being tested. It was the living room. Serafina had allowed him visitation, but she kept it strictly supervised. She wasn't about to let Leo be disappointed. One evening, Sterling arrived at Serafina's penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, She had moved back in, reclaiming the space that was once her prison. He was carrying a large, complicated Lego set, the Millennium Falcon. "It's 5,000 pieces," Sterling said, looking at the box with a mix of determination and terror. "Leo said he wanted it." "Leo is 5, Serafina said, leaning against the door frame, arms crossed. "He wants to play with it. He doesn't have the patience to build it, which means you are building it." And so the Titan of Industry spent the next 4 hours on the floor of the living room, surrounded by tiny grey plastic bricks. Leo sat next to him, supervising. "No daddy that goes there," Leo pointed out, holding a juice box. "Are you sure, buddy? The instruction manual says—" Sterling squinted at the booklet. "Mommy says instructions are just suggestions," Leo chirped. Sterling looked up at Serafina, who was reading a book on the sofa. She hid a smile behind the pages. "She did she?" Sterling muttered. For the first time in years, the penthouse didn't feel cold. It felt lived in. Watching Sterling struggle with a toy, cursing under his breath, but refusing to give up because his son was watching Serafina, felt a shift in her chest. The wall of ice she had built around her heart wasn't melting, but it was cracking. 6 months later. The seasons turned, and so did the tides of fate. The scandal of the century. Isabelle Dupree's public meltdown had finally reached its conclusion. Victor Dupree had been indicted on federal racketeering charges, thanks to the dossier Serafina had quietly handed over to the SEC. The Dupree fortune, built on corruption, evaporated overnight. Isabelle, stripped of her status and her father's protection, had fled to Texas, marrying an oil baron 3 times her age, just to maintain a fraction of her lifestyle. She was a relic of the past, a ghost story Serafina no longer feared. But the present was vibrant. It was a Saturday in Central Park. The cherry blossoms were falling like pink snow, coating the grass in petals. On Field 4, the Pee-wee kickers were in the middle of a chaotic soccer match. The players were more interested in chasing butterflies than the ball, but the parents were cheering as if it were the World Cup. Sterling Hawthorne stood on the sidelines. He wasn't wearing his armor, the Italian suit. He was wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, his sleeves pushed up. "Go Leo, stay open," Sterling shouted, cupping his hands. Leo, wearing a jersey that was 2 sizes too big, tripped over his own feet, did a somersault and popped back up laughing. "He has your coordination," Serafina noted dryly from the bench. Sterling laughed, jogging back to sit beside her. He wiped sweat from his forehead. "Hey, he recovered. That's the Hawthorne resilience." "He's happy," Serafina said, watching her son. "That's all that matters." Sterling turned to look at her. The sun caught the sharp angle of her profile. She was more beautiful now than the day he married her, not because of the expensive clothes, but because of the confidence that radiated from her. "Sarah," he started, his voice dropping to a serious register. "Don't," she warned gently, not looking away from the field. "I'm not asking for anything," Sterling said quickly. I wanted to tell you. You were right. I usually am. About what specifically? About everything. About the company. About Leo. About me." Sterling looked down at his hands. Hands that used to sign billion-dollar deals, now stained with a bit of dirt from fixing Leo's cleats. "I was building a life that looked good from the outside, but it was hollow. You forced me to burn it down. I'm glad you did." Serafina finally looked at him. She searched his eyes for the old calculation, the old greed. She found only sincerity. "You're a good father, Sterling," she said softly. "Better than I expected." "I'm trying to be a partner too," he said. "To you. I know I can never undo the past. I know I broke something that can't be glued back together. But we make a good team. The company has never been stronger. The company is thriving, Serafina agreed. And us? Sterling asked the question, hanging in the air. Serafina looked back at Leo, who had just managed to kick the ball in the correct direction. She smiled. We are parents, she said, and we are business partners. She reached out, and for the first time in 5 years, placed her hand over his. It wasn't a promise of romance, not yet. It was a peace treaty. It was an acknowledgement that the war was over. Let's just see where the next quarter takes us, she whispered. Sterling smiled, turning his hand to clasp hers. I can live with that. The whistle blew. The game was over. Leo came sprinting toward them. His face flushed, knees, grass-stained, a picture of pure, unadulterated joy. Did you see me? Did you see me? Leo screamed, launching himself into Sterling's arms. I saw you, Ace! Sterling swung him around. You were a tiger out there. Serafina stood up, brushing a cherry blossom petal off her shoulder. She put her sunglasses back on. She watched the 2 men in her life, the one she had made and the one she had remade. The paparazzi were there, of course. They were hiding in the bushes near the tree line. Cameras clicked, capturing the image, the powerful CEO, Serafina Hawthorne, standing tall and victorious, watching her ex-husband hold their son. But the headline the next morning wouldn't be about a scorned wife. It wouldn't be about revenge. The headline in the Wall Street Journal would read, The New Dynasty, How the Hawthornes Merged Family and Fortune to Rule New York. Serafina smiled to herself, grabbed her purse, and began to walk toward the car. Come on, boys, she called out over her shoulder, her voice commanding yet warm. I'm buying ice cream, but only if you can keep up. Sterling put Leo down, grabbed his son's hand, and they ran to catch up with the woman who led them. The Queen was in motion, and the King was just happy to be part of her court. And there you have it, the rise, the fall, and the stunning resurrection of Serafina Hawthorne. She taught the world that you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes you just need to own the building everyone else is shouting in. This story isn't just about money or revenge. It's about the realization that people can change, but only if they are forced to face their own failures. Sterling earned his way back, not with his wallet, but with his time. And Serafina proved that the ultimate power move isn't destroying your enemy. It's turning them into an ally on your own terms. What do you think about the ending? Was Serafina too soft on him, or did Sterling deserve that second chance? And what would you have done if you were in her shoes at that board meeting? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love reading your theories. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have even crazier stories of betrayal and redemption coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge is massive success.
Chase a guy who's running for his life? You gotta, come on, dude, shit, get over here. And just hold him down and bite his neck till he shuts the fuck up for a minute. So you can just sit there and eat his stomach before you go to work. That would really suck. That's why animals just think, oh, let's do this together, man. You chase the parents away, I'm gonna eat the kid, and you circle back. That's why they do it like that. Fuck it, I'm eating babies. This is bullshit. Grown-ups ain't worth the meat. Whoops. All right. Oh, shit. God damn it. Idiot. This isn't a gay voice, by the way. It's not. Shut up. Yeah. I love traveling and seeing all the different parts of the country. I live in New York. There's no value to your doing that at all. I live in New York. There's this old lady in my neighborhood, and she's always walking her dog. She's very old. She just stands here just being old. And the dog just fights gravity every day. Just the two of them, the dog's got a cloudy eye, and she's got a cloudy eye, and they just stand there looking at the street in 2 dimensions together, and she's always wearing like this sweater dress. I guess it was a sweater when she was like 5'10", but now it's just like this sweater, and her legs are a nightmare. They're just white with green streaks and bones sticking out, and her legs are awful. I saw a guy with no legs wheeling by, and he was like, ugh, no, thank you. I do not want those. I'd rather just have air down here like I have than to look down at that shit. I see these two all the time. And I always look at them and I always think, God, I hope she dies first. I do! I hope she dies first for her sake. Because I don't want her to lose the dog. I don't think she'll be able to handle it. If the old lady dies first, I'm not worried about the dog. Because the dog doesn't even know about the old lady. This dog is aware of 3 inches around his head. He's living in 2-second increments. The second he's in and the one he just left is all he knows about. But if he dies, this lady, she's gonna be destroyed because this dog is all she has. And I know he's all she has because she has him. If she had one person in her life, she would not keep this piece of shit little dog. Even if just some young woman in her building one morning were to say, "Good morning, Gladys," she'd be like, "Oh, good," and just flush him down the